Welcome to a Working Nation roundtable discussion in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm your host, Hari Srinivasan. Imagine making a mistake or getting arrested 5, 10, even 20 years ago, and still having it determine what kind of job you could get today, or if you could even get one at all.
It starts with the opportunities we give people.
For 70 million Americans, 1 in 3 adults, that's reality. Meanwhile, industries like construction and healthcare are desperate for workers, while millions of people are locked out of opportunity. That's why we're gathered here in Philadelphia, a city with one of the highest incarceration rates, but also home to groundbreaking second chance initiatives. So tonight, I'm joined by Stephen C. Preston, President and CEO of Goodwill Industries International, Patricia Blumenauer, COO at Philadelphia Works, Jay Jordan, Vice President of Community Engagement at Reform Alliance, and Teresa Hodge, CEO of Mission Launch and co-founder of R3Score. Welcome. Before we go any further, let's clear something up. When we think of justice-impacted individuals, we might think of the 2 million people who are incarcerated in state and federal prisons. But what about the roughly 20 million who have felony convictions, or the 80 million who have criminal records but who have never been convicted, or the more than 3.5 million who are on parole or probation, or the millions who don't pay child support, which is a jailable crime in almost every state? It's an umbrella term that includes not just people who've served time. Many want to work, but they've been shut out by outdated policies and hiring practices. We're talking about second chances, opportunities, and breaking down the barriers that are keeping millions from the workforce. But first, let's get an idea of exactly who we're talking about. Patricia, you work with people here in Philadelphia. Give me an idea of what kinds of people are coming through your system.
So we're seeing folks with a whole host of backgrounds. So you've got folks that have just like summary offenses, small things, folks who have potentially had an arrest but have never spent any time in incarceration, all the way up to folks who have major felonies who've spent years and years in the prison system.
So these are people ultimately who want to work.
Absolutely. Folks don't show up at a career center because they don't want a job. They want to get into employment. They want jobs that are going to help them to earn a family-sustaining wage.
Teresa, what does the general population think when we start talking about this conversation? What is the first kind of narrative that pops into people's heads?
Yeah, so for me, what I have found is that often people think of either a Black man or a Latino man, and there's a narrative that they have in their head about that particular person. Sometimes that narrative determines what you feel they're deserving now. But when you think of more than 70 million Americans who have an arrest or conviction record, they're people. They're citizens. They're moms, they're dads, they're aunts, they're uncles. They are buying groceries alongside you, and they're just really trying to work and earn and be productive.
Let's put into perspective, right? There's 70 million. So there's currently about 6 or 7 million people in jail, in prison, on probation, on parole. That's about 1 in 10. So what we're saying is 9 out of 10 people have already served their time. They paid their debt to society. They've been out an average of 6 years. They're over the age of 30, and they're not committing crimes. Actually, they're just as likely to commit a crime as someone that never committed a crime ever in their life, right? So when we say justice impacted, we're talking about folks who, while everybody else was going to college, they were going to jail. You know, first offenders are usually between the ages of 17 and 23 years old. These are kids. Look, I got locked up when I was 19. Everybody else is going to college. I got caught up in doing some nonsense. You know, when I got out, I was 26. My peers were just getting out of college. And here I am trying to figure out how to get a job, right? We're not talking about folks who are, you know, still in the cycle of incarceration. They're out of that cycle, but they stepped into another cycle called post-conviction poverty.
A person can leave prison, but there are a number of laws in various states at a federal level that keep a person from being able to navigate their lives and be able to do what everybody else wants to do. Get a job, earn, go back to college if that's what you want to do, if you see that as the brightest path. But the ability to navigate this reentry process is just extremely challenging. It not only impacts the individual, it impacts their families, it impacts communities, And long term, as a society, we all pay for it.
Yeah.
The first piece is that you probably can't even get signed up for services because you don't have documentation. People will come in without an ID, without a license, without access to their Social Security card. And because all of these programs are federally or state funded, there are lots of regulations that are attached that have eligibility requirements that all have to be proven, kind of are constantly trying to have to prove yourself. Also, most folks might come out without stable housing. So I don't have housing, I don't have an address. How can I even begin to think about getting an ID? If there are things like back fines, child support arrearages that are attached to someone's ability to even get a driver's license, you can't get a driver's license. You can't use that to then get a job because oftentimes jobs are requiring driver's licenses these days. These different pieces are just piling one on top of the other as someone walks into a center and tries to even make that first step.
Yeah, well, I think one of the important things to understand is before that person even gets to an employer, a lot of these issues need to be resolved. And there are so many impediments to even to get to that point. Then when they get to an employer and begin applying for jobs, we hear regularly that they just cannot get their foot in the door, period. So once they get their foot in the door, then they're dealing with the narratives we were just talking about a second ago, and those are pretty powerful. And you have to really prove yourself in a fundamentally different way with all of the questions that people face to say, no, you really should hire me even though I've got this background. But in so many cases, and I would say even in the majority of cases, these other impediments make it that much harder for people who have all sorts of other hurdles to come over to get that job.
So, what you're describing is well beyond the capability of some employers. They're just going to be like, look, I can't deal with all of that. I just want the easy button, right?
Yep.
What's the upside to you as an employer from doing this?
Well, it's enormous. A lot of people kind of take that first step forward because they want to do something good, but pretty quickly, they realize they're not only doing something good for the community, something very good is happening in their business.
Yeah.
Number one, people who've come from many of these backgrounds are really hungry for a job. And they get that job. They're incredibly loyal employees. They attach. They're incredibly engaged employees. They represent the workforce culture in a positive way. The culture, a good workforce culture for somebody who's come out of prison, they are in an ecosystem that is positive and encouraging many cases. Many cases there may be development opportunities. People embed really well in the workforce. And many organizations who have a policy of hiring people who've been justice involved have found a couple things. Number one, their culture is better. Number two, they regularly report an ability to fill open jobs in an incredibly competitive environment. And as we all know, all of us who run businesses know that your employees are the most important asset in your business. And if you can fill those roles, you're going to be much better in the marketplace. It has tremendous dividends for businesses. And all the statistics say employers who have committed policies will openly say that the people they hire are as good or better employees than the rest of their employee base.
When we engage with someone on a regular basis, the bias, the belief of who it is goes away. I recall I was working in a co-working space. My daughter was managing a co-working space. And my daughter and I, we co-founded our nonprofit, Mission Launch, together. And someone came up and said, well, why are you doing this? And he said, is it a family member? Was it your dad? Was it your brother? Was it your uncle? And my daughter said, no, it's my mom. That lady right over there. And he's like, your mom, that lady? But he had engaged with me. And I didn't wear a shirt that said, I've been to prison. And that person had already decided he liked me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Had he known, I'm not sure if it would have been the same outcome.
I also think that when employers regularly hire people who've been justice impacted, it's pretty quickly demystified. And, we have Goodwill locations where, over half the employees are people who've been formerly incarcerated. And it's really not an issue anymore, right? These are our team members. The stigma goes away and it's all about human beings. Our backgrounds are important, who we are, and also important what we bring to the workplace.
Teresa, I also wonder if there's a difference, and Jay jumped in here too, on what crime. You were in for a white-collar crime. Jay, you weren't, right? So does that context change the type of biases that people have, or is it just a blanket statement?
So for me, I don't know about you, Jay, but I have found that it really just depends. I feel like I'm always having to navigate the fact that I have a criminal record, and I don't get to know what filter or what lens you're processing. You know, what are you trying to de-risk?
It's interesting, right? Because 75% of the population that have a record didn't go to prison. 1 in 4 people with a record go to prison. Everybody else didn't go to prison. The average crime is like less than 2 minutes. So 2 minutes out of somebody's life, and the rest of their life they're judged by that 2 minutes. Just imagine the worst 2 minutes, the worst mistake you ever made. My crime was like 3.5 minutes or whatever. 3.5 minutes. I'm 40 years old. Like, I'm not a mathematician, but I imagine, you know, how many minutes have I lived. That's a small subset of who I actually am.
And it's only one data point.
One small data point. The people with the lowest recidivism rate are the folks with the most violent crimes.
Absolutely.
They spend all that time in prison, they get out and they're totally different people. So, you know, there's 2 points. One, yes, there will always be a kind of bias for people who broke the law, for sure. And we're human, so you want to know. Especially, I'm a parent now, I'm a new parent. You know, if I have somebody in my home watching my kids, I'm going to want to know what they did, what type of crime they did, if they did a crime. When we're talking about employment, what does it mean to be rehabilitated? Because that's the part that makes the bias happen. We don't judge people in recovery the way we judge people with criminal records, because we know a lot of people are in recovery, like, oh, I'm in AA, I'm in NA. There's like this sense of resolve you have, or I'm going to church, there's a sense of resolve you have. With normal criminal records, there's no definition of rehabilitation. We're doing work in California and trying to change the expungement laws. The first thing I looked at is like, well, what does rehabilitation mean? So as a community, if somebody goes through this system of California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, you expect for them to get out and the state to say, no, these folks are rehabilitated. But there's no definition, there's no off-ramp. And so the society is left making those decisions on our own. One of my closest friends, Susan Burton, just got a pardon, right? A pardon is supposed to mean, in the eyes of the government, in the eyes of America, you are rehabilitated, you're not the same person. Susan's in her 70s.
And she's been home a long time.
It's been home a long time. Just now, is it okay for Susan to watch my kids? Right? Like, how long is long enough? Last thing I'll say is, when I was at a previous organization, we started this program called Time Done. The name was intentional. You know, time done, right? But the tagline was, when will my sentence end? When does it end? How long are you gonna piecemeal my humanity back? So like there's built-in bias because there's no end date on what does it mean to be a bad person, right? Breaking the law, you considered a bad person. And then I think there's an on-ramp to humanity, and I think we're getting there as a society now. I think, you know, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, independent, whether you're a blue state or a red state, whether you're a Christian, a Jewish, whether you're a Muslim, you all agree like there's like this sense of humanity, and I think we've moved this discussion to humanity, and now our policies have to follow that.
And this is also a space where it's kind of an easy one to start with employers, because we're helping employers look at these outdated policies, these policies that are like true barriers. The talent shortage is real. You're an employer. There is a population that is ready and able to work, but why are you looking back 20 years? You know, let's shorten the look back. That alone can open up the door for so many more people.
What we found also is, you know, when we've surveyed attitudes for corporate executives, specifically HR hiring executives and people who run businesses, that, you know, over 80% say second chance individuals perform as well as other employees, right? But when it comes to actually hiring people, the behaviors are much different. And it's so important not just to change behaviors, but to change narratives. As Teresa said, those narratives are so important in the organization to change. It takes a lot of commitment with an employer to actually advance this issue.
And these snap judgments are shaping the future for millions of Americans from all walks of life. So how do we determine who's redeemable and who's not? After the break, we're going to take a look at a polarizing case. On the one hand, a qualified candidate. On the other, a man responsible for a violent crime. Despite doing his time and making amends, we are forced with a situation that begs the question, who deserves a second chance and who decides? Welcome back. Before the break, we posed a question: who deserves a second chance? And perhaps as important, who gets to decide? It's one thing to talk about redemption in the abstract, but when it's someone applying for a job, sitting across from you, with a past that's complicated, those conversations become real. And the answers aren't always easy. Tonight, we're going to show you what that decision point looks like. A candidate with experience, ambition, and a record. What happens when opportunity meets hesitation? Take a look.
My name is Michael. I went to prison August 2016, and I was released March 2023. I went to prison for rape. I was a lead computer operator for a major hospital in Florida, and I was introduced to drugs at that time. I lost everything. I lost, house, family. I had a good job. Felt a little hopeless. You blame other people for your circumstance. The job's fault, or, it was from my childhood, or whatever the case may be. It was somebody else's fault. I never took any initiative, or there was never no desire to work on self, to become a better person. There's a psychosis that comes along with meth in particular. Very, very dangerous drug for the brain. Later, I recognized what I was doing was taking advantage of her vulnerabilities. I knew she needed money. Just a lot of things that I could have done differently or should have done differently. The police came. It's like a bucket of cold ice water hitting you in the face. That's really when you recognize the extent of the harm, how off you've gotten away from, God and what's really important. That's a self-motivator to really get back on track. I was sentenced to 12 years, but they transferred me to San Quentin. And at San Quentin, which is where the lifers are at, they're about getting out, and that requires some change. I started doing the meetings, AA meetings on the inside, not just working on finding out who I was and what was important, but practicing, being. And then they had the Last Mile program. And so I got involved with the Last Mile, whose focus is ending recidivism through technology. I had already had a degree, but, I liked math. I learned back end, I learned database, how to manage database, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is front end. And I thrived in that environment. Once I was released, I went through Hack Reactor, which was one of the top boot camps to go to for software engineering. Now that I'm completed, I'm ready, and I start my job search. And the biggest interview I had was with Pinterest. That was an intense interview, and I didn't get that job. It kind of gets you down, especially as time goes on. The biggest challenge is the stigma. You're defined, by your conviction. When they're doing background checks and they're taking a risk assessment, they're not really assessing the individuals. They're assessing their charges. All of the jobs I applied for are remote jobs. I don't know how to overcome that. I still put in applications, still get rejections. And the only people that really give me opportunity, I do side work, do construction. If I'm ever short, I just pull out the credit card. Just trusting that God's going to get me through. I'm passionate. I've been told that. I'm very passionate about my career. My voice goes up. Even here, the sound guy asked me, "Are you a soft talker?" I am, unless I'm talking about something passionate. The jobs that I'm applying for, I bring a level of commitment and passion for the position that doesn't show when you look up my criminal background. It's not because I'm not prepared. It's not because I don't have the skills. It's just coming out of prison, having a record makes it that much more challenging.
So here's a case of somebody who looks like they have the skills, especially to do a remote software job, right, where he would theoretically not be around any other employees if that's the concern for an employer.
I mean, think about hearing Michael's story is just devastating. So that's tough. You know, you went to jail for rape. It's hard for someone to be like, oh, just give him a chance. It's just, think about the survivors. I worked with thousands of survivors across the country. And one of the things they say is, you know, would you rather this person not have a job? Mm-hmm. That's the alternative. Not work and go back to your community next door to you with no job.
And what does that look like if we are a society where we have 70 million people who are unable to work? It's not a safe society.
No, this gets to the issue of what our goals are as a society. You know, somebody's already completed their incarceration, which is often very significant. They're now, in the eyes of the justice system, theoretically ready to move forward. And now, in so many cases, we're continuing to punish people. And actually, the people that have the highest hurdles to move forward, you know, do they have enough education? Did they come from, I mean, you talk about women in prison, histories of abuse everywhere, leading in some cases to drug addiction. And these are some of the difficult cases we're talking about. The opportunity for transformation is astounding.
But transformation on society, right? You know,
Exactly, because we as society have to see that possibility and believe in it. And it can happen, and it does happen every day.
And
absolutely.
when it does happen, you give us a shot.
Yeah.
We're going to show you.
The most brilliant people I've ever met in my life, I met them while I was in prison. And so I often say it's an indictment against society and not just that person when they're not given an opportunity to move back. So you have to become a master navigator to do what Jay did, to do what I did. We're exceptions, but we're not exceptional. There are lots of people who, if they are given the same opportunity, they can move ahead.
So, Patricia, when you see someone like Michael, how do we assess his qualifications and at the same time knowing that the employers you work with might have sort of a different risk assessment scale for themselves?
It's really tough because to his point, he's being judged by more than just that. So even working with someone to beef up their resume, to get all the right things on the paper might get him to a certain point in the interview process, but oftentimes there's going to be a point that he gets stuck. And it's why the work needs to be systemic, because just working with him as an individual isn't going to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I tell a story often of a job I applied for, very similar, where I was going to be working from home using my computer, my internet, in my house. And I got through the very beginning of the online application, you know, name, address, very basic demographics. The very next question was, have you ever been convicted of a felony? I checked the box, yes, and the screen went black. And I remember I was sitting at my desk, because I had a job at the time, and I remember my chair being on rollers, and I froze, and you know the chair went back because I was just that shocked. And I said, not only will humans discriminate against you, that algorithm was so tight that it discriminated. And people have said, we've applied for 100 jobs and got 100 rejections. I can't even imagine what it would feel like for any of us to be rejected 100 times for jobs that we knew we were qualified for.
It's such a poignant reminder of how quick the trigger is, even for people who just have, you know, come to the table with remarkable skills and in a job situation, which really shouldn't present a concern.
Here's the thing. In this era, we are one Google search away from the worst moment, the worst 20 seconds of your life or whatever it was, being public information. So as an employer, how do you manage an employee's need or interest in saying, hey, are you creating a safe environment for me?
I think it's important for employers who are interested in moving forward on this issue to take one step at a time. You don't need to boil the ocean. You don't need to say every person with every background is right for us. You need a workplace that will bring people in effectively. Now, in these situations, I don't think that's the case because you have people who are, professionally trained, ready to go. If people say, I care about this, okay, take one step at a time. Bring in, 5 people into your organization with a particular profile that you feel people would be comfortable with, okay? Mm-hmm. I believe strongly that employers should be taking steps in that direction, one step at a time, and learning in the process, and reforming their policies, and educating their employees. And I do think over time, you'll see a pretty significant transformation.
The thing around people going to prison who have the hardest time when they get out. So the more proximate you are to the prison gates, the harder it is when you get out, right? So this population, they get out, they're going back to the same zip codes where they commit the crime. You have all these folks who not only can't find jobs, but they can't find housing because of housing policy. The same policies that affect employment affect housing as well. So they're forced to live around each other, right? So you have pockets in America, South Stockton, East Detroit, East St. Louis. We wonder why these places look like this because you got all these folks going back there and they can't find jobs. Like I'm from Stockton, California. Our economic drivers is healthcare, government, and education and ag. 3 of those driving sectors I'm blocked out of, or I was blocked out of, right? If your economic driver is healthcare, then people who've been to prison with felonies can't work in healthcare. So they're blocked out of that entire sector, right? And so it's not just about the individual employers right now, it's also about the status of your economy locally. So if you're a local elected, if you're a board of supervisor or a county commissioner or a city council member or a state rep or a governor, and you're looking at, okay, we have declining labor force participation rates. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Why is it that, half the population is not even involved in looking for jobs and they're in this low wage situations like warehouses? It's because you're locking people out of your growth economy.
Yeah. Jay, this conversation is a little bit about kind of risk, right? And how we assess that risk. A lot of employers use background check systems, right? So is there a fly in the ointment of how those systems themselves are structured?
We talked about this, right? What is the criminal record? Criminal record is the line of data. Mm-hmm. And depending on where it lives at, that's what creates the collateral consequences, the 48,000 legal restrictions. So these lines of data, there's one database that the police have. And once you commit a crime, you break the law, that goes into that database, the police gets it, it's never erased. Mm-hmm. It never goes away. Then the court have their own database. That database is for sale. Mm-hmm. You can go to any courthouse right now and pick up anybody's record if you got the money. Mm-hmm. And that's where the industry comes in. These background check screeners, they buy the court data in bulk, and then they have these shadow databases, and then they sell the databases behind a paywall, right? And then you have the state have the database. That's usually the state police or the State Department of Justice, and that's where you get your fingerprints, your background check usually. That's where that goes, right? That's never erased. Mm-hmm. And then the federal government have the database, the FBI have the database, right? They share that database with all other countries. Like I can't go to Canada, mm-hmm. I can't go to Australia, I can't go to Amsterdam. I'm not gonna be able to see the Eiffel Tower. We have a system that incentivizes background checks.
So you built something called the R3 score. What is that?
Yeah, so R3 score is a risk assessment specifically for people with arrest or conviction records, because just having an arrest record is enough, even if a person hasn't been convicted. So for us, we describe our tool as a criminal background check meets a credit score, because we give an assessment between 300 to 850, like a credit score, because most people know what 650 means. Mm. And so 650, 700 symbolizes for them, it brings trust in. It's like a certificate of rehabilitation. It's saying the person is done. They have been rehabilitated. They are now ready for opportunities. I once, prior to incarceration, ran an HR department, was a headhunter. So what I understood was, as an HR professional, I was trained to screen people out. Mm-hmm. We'd get hundreds, maybe thousands of applicants. And my job was get rid of folks. Having an arrest or conviction record, depending on what corporation you're in, it's the reason. So people who have an arrest or conviction record are automatically screened out. That's why when I did that online digital application, it screened me out right away, because the point was, it doesn't matter. We don't want to know anything else about that person. So for us, we look at who were they before they went to prison? We try to get a whole snapshot because as you talked about certain zip codes and where people come from, people are more likely to go to prison in certain zip codes than they are to go to college. And so we can bring lots of data in to begin to understand what was happening in that person's life. And if they went to prison, how were they able to maximize their time? And when they come home, how are they trending towards stability? And so what we have found with some of our employers, what they want to know is this person risky or are they ready? Our whole point was, could we screen people into opportunity? And what does that look like? We don't hide a person has a record. But what else would you, Mr. Employer, want to know? Would you want to know, do they show up for work on time? Would you want to know they have higher education, that they served maybe in the military if they did? Would you want a full assessment of who this person is standing in front of you today? And that's what we do. We just try to bring information that speaks to the past, the present, and some predictability of what the future could look like. But also, we work with, on our nonprofit side, corporations, and we take them on learning journeys because we know you got to get through higher leadership, you got to get through HR, and you got to get through legal. And if you don't get all three of them on board, nobody's going to take that leap.
And the hiring managers throughout the company.
Absolutely.
You really have to change the culture.
We believe that if more corporations are interested in filling a lot of those vacant jobs, they can't say no to a third of the population or half of all working age adults.
Sometimes the biggest barrier isn't the resume or the record, it's the culture. Policy might say yes, but perception still says no. And the only way to change that is to understand it. The challenges, the bias, the quiet systems that stack the deck. Because in some cases, those systems don't just make it hard to get hired, they make it nearly impossible to stay hired. Many justice-impacted individuals are legally required to find work. Yet parole and probation conditions can actively prevent them from keeping a job. Jay, you were talking about some of these challenges. What are some things that the rest of us don't think about that would just be structural impediments from that person getting back on their feet?
Yeah, they call it the probation, the prison pipeline. It happens. So you get out in your own probation or parole, and one of the conditions is find a job, or you get sent back. But people on probation are 3 times more likely to be unemployed. Or, you're making $7 an hour, like $7.25 at the federal minimum wage or whatever. You're making that. You can't live on that. You can't pay your fines and fees, which you get violated for. You can't pay for transportation. Sometimes in some of these rural states, you may live in one city, but the probation or parole office is in another city. Same county, you have to find a bus line that goes there, and transportation is not good in some of these states. So you get violated for missing appointments. There's something called technical violations where you can be late for 5 minutes late to a meeting, they can violate you for it. We are literally talking about a system that incentivizes going back. Another issue, you can't go to a different county and go to work. Some of these places where you're going back to, there's no economic opportunity, so you have to travel outside your city or your county to find work. I live in New Jersey. A ferry ride across the river, 10 minutes. If I was on supervision, I couldn't cross that Hudson. One devastating fact around people on supervision that a lot of folks don't know is, say you do get the job. We have several people in our New York office that have that are on supervision. God bless them. They tell me all the time, "Hey, boss, man, can I leave?" And it just brings it. I know what they mean, and it just brings me to tears sometimes. I'm like, "Yeah, go ahead, man. Take the day." I know he has to go and hop on a train from Midtown all the way to Brooklyn for a 5-minute meeting with his parole officer.
My probation officer would come to my job. Imagine that level of stress, that you're sitting on your job and you've got to tell someone, I got to go downstairs for a few minutes because they needed to see me. And I had negotiated, you cannot come up into my workspace.
And the way they come, sometimes they come fully decked out. Bulletproof vest, gun on the side, so you do get a job, and you're trying to destigmatize and de-risk, and the hiring manager, and everything goes right. Yeah. And all of a sudden, here they come, full metal jacket.
Yeah. Maybe someone didn't know that you had a record because the HR department, concealed it and did all the right things. But in that moment, it's exposed.
There are some states that still on the books have lifetime parole. Lifetime parole. So imagine you do all that you can do inside prison. And prison is punishment. Let's not get it wrong. People who get out, we're not saying that we shouldn't be held accountable. We're not saying we shouldn't be punished. We broke the law and we paid for that. 90 months of my life in prison, and then to get out and to always be told I'm not good enough. So I'm good enough to spend my money with companies. I'm good enough to be a tax-paying citizen, but I'm not good enough to access the entire economy. It's tough being on supervision. It is like this invisible boot is on your neck. And it's not because you're trying to be slick and get away with something. You are literally trying to rebuild your life, rebuild connections with people who, quite frankly, might have lost trust in you, right? I've seen probation checks when they show up with 3 or 4 cars. And you have people who, their kids have to watch their dad or their mother like go through something and they already paid their debt. They did that. The state of California, the state of New York, the state of Pennsylvania said, you go to prison, 2 years of probation, then you're off. But they didn't say I'm gonna show up and your kids have to see you get rearrested. You don't have to take you to the bathroom and you strip all the way down to nothing, and to bend over and cough. It's extremely demeaning. There's a very small percentage of people who do extremely, heinous things, and most of those folks never get out. But these folks are out, and I always tell folks, if I'm that scary, why am I out? If I'm that untrustworthy, why am I here? You should have kept me in there. But no, there's a process, and we are released. It is not a large population. It's a very small population, considering the percentage of Americans we're talking about with records. It's 3.8 million people, and they are the most scrutinized. They're out there living amongst us. The most scrutinized is extremely difficult, and God bless all of y'all, because you work with people on supervision, you do it at Goodwill, you do it work for. This is the population we need to be focused on, because it is the most crucial. When we say 70% or 60% of people, they're talking about folks on supervision. And we should be creating pathways to success, not cycles back, right? That 60% is not because somebody said, I'm gonna commit another crime. It's technical violations. Most of it's technical violations, being late or not being able to pay fines and fees. Why would I not be able to pay fines and fees? The quick answer is, I don't have the money. I just don't have the money.
I often say, nobody's ever left prison saying, I can't wait to get back here. Right? And so you're right. They would pay the fine, the fee, if they had the resources to do it. It's an invisible life sentence that folks are serving.
It made me think of a manufacturing employer that I just met with this week. And he talked about the public transportation being an issue and how there's flexibility for them around, if you're late because your bus was late, I can work that out with you to stay late. Using examples like that to say, okay, if we can get to that space for public transportation, why can't we get to flexibility for other things like probation appointments? So being able to get other employers to that space where we're giving flexibility for things that allows really good workers to remain working for you by just letting them leave a little bit early, come in a little bit late tomorrow.
Well, you talked about a systemic fix that we need. And so manufacturing is a good example of that. Energy as well. Energy has reported that they're gonna have 22 million worker shortage. Well, we know where they can fill some of those vacancies. And these are good family sustaining wage paying jobs. They're willing to hire folks with records because they recognize that in many cases, 1 in 3 or 1 in 2 applicants have an arrest or conviction record, and they no longer can afford to say no.
So we have industry partnerships where we have advanced manufacturing companies at the table together. If 1 or 2 can start to tell their stories about how this is working out for them, then you start to see other employers get on board and say like, oh, that sounds interesting. Can we talk with you a little bit more about how we might change our practices?
One of the things that constantly comes back to me is how any commonsensical person who listens to these stories and listens to how the system works would take a step back and say, like, how could that possibly be the case?
Right.
This is just ridiculous.
It's hard because we're talking about 3.8 million people, about 3 or 4 of them making less than $25,000 a year. Outcomes are important. We're literally regulating people to poverty. I'm not saying a handout. Folks don't want a handout. Folks just want to, like, hey, let me succeed.
We've got millions of open jobs in this country and millions of people who are ready to work. But too often, the very systems meant to support accountability end up punishing progress. Parole and probation can create a trap requiring employment, but imposing rules that make holding down a job nearly impossible. When we come back, we'll take a look at what happens when businesses stop seeing justice-impacted individuals as a risk and start seeing them as a resource. We've spent a lot of time today talking about barriers, about systems that punish people long after they've served their time. But the truth is, when we exclude justice-impacted individuals from the workforce, we're not just harming them, we're holding back the economy. Because the reality is, this isn't a small population. It's 1/3 of all adults in this country. So let's talk about just the dollars and cents here. How much does, say, your company and a group of companies profit from the workforce that you are tapping into that perhaps other people aren't?
Well, I don't have an exact number for you there, but what I will tell you is, employers who embrace people who've been justice impacted regularly report that they're getting the labor they need, that they have fewer hiring challenges, and the value of that is enormous. I'd also mention, which is a bit of a segue into the broader issue, is the cost of somebody being incarcerated or churning through the system to society is enormous. And as a person who started his career on Wall Street, I will tell you, any private equity person would take the ROI of helping a person move forward in their lives, right? And we talk about the $40,000 or $45,000 a year that it costs to keep somebody incarcerated. We're not talking about lost wages. We're not talking about lost tax revenue. We're not talking about the significant support that that person's family might need just to pay their bills. We're not talking about the fact that the children in those families are going to be much more likely to go down a difficult pathway than if that parent was with them in the household supporting them. And so the broader societal cost is enormous here. So the value equation here for society from a dollars and cents standpoint is incredibly compelling.
So Patricia, how do you quantify that through the work that you're doing? Is there a way to look at an economic impact?
I think the examples that Steve gave were great because, again, you're looking at the whole picture. I even think of our public transit system. So that is an industry that affects all other industries in the city because people need to ride the bus or the train to get to work. And they have hundreds of openings, and they have stretched their Fair Chance initiative quite a bit to allow for folks to get through that process easier. And they're hiring people at a much quicker rate, getting lots more folks through the process. So their buses can run on time. So there are things like that you don't even think about from an economic perspective that are affected by us not opening these processes more.
Yeah, if you think about, well, first, there's $300 billion in lost wages because of work restrictions, $87 billion in lost annual GDP nationally. But when people start to have jobs, and I've seen this literally time over time again, where I've seen folks make, the success stories make $40,000, $50,000, now they're up to $120,000. They're into the mainstream economy. They're not into the low stream economy where their money is going out the door and there's no investment. The increased social activity, they're going to parks, they're going to movies, they're going and spending money and infusing their local economy, with their hard-earned money, right? That's increased tax dollars. People getting out of prison, we spend money. We spend, and when we have it, we spend it. So it's increased savings, it's increased investment, increased social activity, increased economic activity in the places that need it the most. Think about it like when we did the stimulus during COVID. There are more people out spending money. So when people have money, they spend it. And that's the bottom line. And the areas where these people live at desperately need increased economic activity and increased social activity.
And I think I would just add that I don't know if I trust yet all the data that we do have. When we talk about quantifying, because I remember watching data come in and it jumping, and it kept going up and up. And in that moment, I thought, we don't know. We are not quantifying all the cost associated with a person going to record on them, their family, their children. What we do know is what you said, Steve. It's not a great return on an investment for this country. to lock up people and then leave them locked out of opportunity for the rest of their lives.
And I think to your point, and Jay, you're getting to it as well, it's sort of like, the pebble in the pond where you see every one of those those circles going out and out and out. These things really affect the broader societal ecosystem in so many ways. And it doesn't take very long to begin drawing some of those, but I think to your point, I don't know that we really understand how much value there is.
So we've talked about the justice impacted workers themselves, but how do you change or prepare the culture of the employees who could be working alongside to prepare them to be more supportive or to just be more aware of what you're doing as an employer or as a program?
Well, I think to the extent that it's appropriate, employees, if they understand that somebody's coming in that has been justice involved, that they understand it, and if they have questions or concerns, that we talk about it, and that they are ready to embrace people coming in. I think for the most part, once you get to know somebody and they're in the door, it goes into the rearview mirror pretty quickly because it's just about working with people. But it's no different than bringing in somebody with a particular disability. We provide people with accommodations, we provide them with support, and all of a sudden, everybody kind of understands that's who we are as a company. And we just start to see each other as people. And I think that's one of the reasons why companies who have an active program of bringing in justice-involved people find that they have richer, stronger cultures, which, I think has been documented many times over. And as a business leader, one of the top things I focus on, which we should all be focusing on, is employee engagement and sort of cultural health.
Patricia?
Yeah, I think that there's two aspects that I see. It's really very well worth it to invest in training and upskilling managers around this. So ensuring that managers are ready to have the conversations, understand what the company line is here around this, but also just how to really manage the interpersonal interactions. And then on the individual side, preparing the person going into the job from a workforce programming perspective that this might be a thing. And here are some skills that you can learn and practice when in a workforce program to be able to have those difficult conversations with your potential future coworkers.
Yeah. Jay, I wanted to pick up on something that Reform Alliance has been working on. In Pennsylvania, you were able to get Senate Bill 838 passed. Is this a model that other states can pick up and run with? And just kind of describe, if you can, a little bit about what that bill did.
It just incentivize good behavior, right? Incentivize that, hey, if you are working towards, getting a job or vocation, if you're working to better your life, then the probation policy incentivizes that. I think the model here is let's incentivize people doing the right thing and let's reward that. Our reward system now is non-existent, but we're getting there. Reform has done a lot of work in Pennsylvania and other states to build this reward system out that feeds into public safety, feeds into the growth economy, feeds into that feeling of, okay, we're going in the right direction. For many, many years, all you see on the news was further punishing, right? It's like, crime is happening, we need more harsher laws, harsher sentences.
Yeah.
And we did that. We did that in America. We looked at what harshness gets us, and it got us more crime. It got us more people going to prison. That's all it got us. And so, we are like, hey, maybe there's a different approach. Maybe there's an approach that looks at the entirety of the situation as opposed to just this one rigid way of doing things, which is, you better do this or we're going to send you back. When if we do the right thing and say, actually, we're going to incentivize you doing the right thing too and reward that, we all win. We all win both in public safety. We all win as a society. And that person, not only them, not only Jay Jordan, but little Jay and Dom and Carmen and my 4 little toy poodles, they all win too. They get the good food. They don't get the cheap food. I got a good job, right? And if we look at it like that, we're investing into households. We're investing in the families, right? And not by giving them money, by just stop with the nonsense and stop saying, well, you can't do this and you can't do that, and opening up doors. They will do the work themselves.
All right, jump ball for everybody. I guess one last thought, if you had to, what's something that you wish people knew about this topic?
These are individuals that are very capable. And for corporations specifically, I think that there is a unique opportunity for you to use a cohort model that, Patricia was talking about. Most employers don't want to go first, but they're willing to go together.
Patricia?
I wish that more businesses and employers understood that how the small tweaks they could make in their policies and processes will change so many lives by opening up doors to employment at their places of business.
I think as a society, we need to believe that people can change. We need to believe that there is value in investing to help them change. And once we believe that, we have to do the hard work to invest in the right things to support them on that pathway, which includes taking away impediments. And in many cases for people with challenges, it includes helping them through that tough journey, helping them become work ready, helping them get the skills they need, and helping them get the other supports they need to be able to cross that bridge from a very difficult place to a completely different future.
And it's okay to do the right thing. It's okay. It's okay. I think we got stuck into this weird world where it was okay to do nothing. I think we're to a point where major Fortune 500 companies said, we're doing this. There's a model. When you have Chase Bank say, we're doing this, and it's going to be the thing. When you have, some of the most conservative and liberal states in the country say we're doing this, when Florida says we're doing this, and California says we're doing this. So I think leaving people with, it's okay to do the right thing, because we've already passed that demarcation line.
Steve Preston, Patricia Blumenauer, Jay Jordan, Teresa Hodge, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us. I'm Hari Srinivasan. For more on this topic and other workforce development information, visit us at WorkingNation.org. This show was made possible thanks to the generosity of the Aries Charitable Foundation.
So you can stay there. I can say thank you.
One more sound person to take off the
Do we stay on the purple marks over? We're done with the